So, I mean, look, here's the trick though, right? I think that there's probably a third of the people in this room that I reached out to at some point over the last 4 years going, what do you think's going on out there? I mean, Holquist I would ping, particularly if it was Iran related, is like, what are you guys seeing? There are so many people in this room that actually contributed to a lot of the efforts, particularly around the election work last year. I am simply a physical manifestation of this conference that was in a position of leadership that was able to channel a lot of the concepts, the ideas, the things y'all were worried about, the things that we needed to do. So that was a complete honor to be in that job. I do think that this is an incredibly important conference just because it's different. It's not a vendor shilling experience. It's people coming in and sharing research, really good understanding of the things that you're seeing out there and helping inform what is a woefully inadequate tech policy space here in this city. I had the opportunity to go to dinner with a member of Congress last night who's probably going to get censured by his own party today. But it's the people like that that will listen, that will take conversations and meetings and input and help guide policy. Now, whether that actually lands in anything, because you can't get legislation done in this town, that's a whole different story. Nonetheless, big conference. It's a big week, though. So yesterday, I had the opportunity to release a report with the Aspen Institute on the Commission on Information Disorder. It's a set of about 15 different recommendations that I worked on with a really diverse group of people that you wouldn't necessarily think about in disinformation, but they come from academia, from media, former government officials like me and Will Hurd, who was a congressman in the last Congress. We had Kate Starbird from UW. You had Alex Stamos, my business partner, also at Stanford. We had contributions from a couple of folks in the room. Tom, I saw you around here. So there you are. I think it's a different approach in how to address the current disinformation problem. So I was excited to get that out. It's one of those first things that I jumped into after leaving government last year. Second thing is today, in addition to this conference, it's Sis's 3rd birthday. And I had the honor of leading that and the privilege of leading that organization, of really pushing getting the agency stood up and put in a position to make what I think was a meaningful impact on cybersecurity and democracy in this country. It's good to finally see it have competent leadership in Jen Easterly. She's done a great job. Relatedly, tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary of me being fired for doing my job. So, and I'm treating myself by flying to Las Vegas this afternoon, doing a conference in the morning, and then flying back. So I'll have a lot of playing time to watch. But a lot's happened over the last year for me. Like I said, I've had the opportunity to stand up a consulting practice. A couple of the folks between Bella and Gavin are here. I did the Aspen thing, but I'm also traveling around a lot and talking to folks to kind of hear what they're worried about. And as I've been traveling in the wilderness, both here in the U.S., but also last week I was in Brussels and in Paris talking with NATO and then some clients. I get 3 main questions. Like, the first is, why is it so bad? The second is, what the hell is the government doing about it? And the third is kind of like, shit, what do we do about it? So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of a twist on those 3 questions and my answers, but really kind of thinking about the themes that kind of worry me the most right now, what those actually mean, and then rounding about back off to what do we do about it. And there's not a shot clock here, John, so I'm just going to talk and then start waving. Give me the 5-minute warning. I'm not going to do the normal thing I do when you talk to non-cybersecurity folks, where it's like, so I'm going to tell you about China and Russia. Y'all know more about actually what they're doing on a day-to-day basis than I do. So I'll just say that it's a really scary environment when every single country has the ability to develop certainly intelligence collection capabilities, but also domestic surveillance capabilities. You have criminals that are monetizing vulnerabilities and misconfigurations on a regular basis. And ultimately, everybody's aspiring towards some sort of cyber disruptive capability, actually hitting infrastructure and taking it offline. that's what's going to overcome the force asymmetry that the U.S. enjoys right now. That we have a significant advantage over almost every adversary. So how do they compensate for that? And that's ones and zeros. And one of the kind of rhetorical tricks I'll do in these rooms when I'm talking to folks is like, close your eyes, put yourself 3, 4, 5 years in the future, and think about everything around you. Think about the connected devices in your home, on your person, in your office, in your car. Are there going to be more, or are there going to be fewer? And I think the obvious answer is there's more. And the biggest challenge is the incentive structures as they're set up right now. There's actually not a whole lot of incentives for those devices to be secure by design and deployment. So we can continue to hold these conferences and scare people and actually see some changes in the bigs, right? I mean, we have big technology companies represented here that are doing good things, but the install base is still a really permissive environment. And so as I sit back and think through what are maybe over the last year and a half, some of the trends that worry me the most. The first is SolarWinds, and it's not SolarWinds, right? I mean, that was just the kind of scratching the surface, the manifestation of a broader campaign. There were multiple other companies that were similarly targeted by SVR, Nobelium, Holiday Bear. I'm not sure if Dimitri's here yet, but that seemed, I haven't heard that in a while, but it's capable adversaries like the SVR, like the MSS, that are developing global surveillance infrastructure, real-time, on-demand access, and it's kind of the Willie Sutton trick. So Willie Sutton, famous bank robber, when they asked him, why are you robbing banks? Because that's where the money is. Same thing here. Why are they going after critical software, systemically important software? It's because that's where the access is. That's where the data is. Rather than going knocking on the front door of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the big banks, they go in through the third-party dependencies. And so we're going to continue to see that play out for the foreseeable future. And I think that in part what the administration did by identifying critical software and saying you must be this tall to ride now, I think that was a good thing. I think that should, if done right, should have some cascading effects to the rest of the private sector, not just the government. So the second thing, and this was kind of part of as I was transitioning out, you always hear about people that have an opportunity to leave like a letter in the desk for their successor. Like, what was left undone? Well, lots, but the two things that I had hoped to put a lot more pressure on and a lot more focus on at CISA and then hand it off into kind of a strategic memo. The two things, one was ransomware, and we all know how that turned out over the last 11 months. And the second was disinformation. And on the disinformation front, I won't dig too much deeper here, but I do think that if you continue to tap government officials with disinformation duties otherwise assigned when cybersecurity is their primary focus, it's going to get the outcome you expect, right? You actually have to put someone in a leadership position with thinking through a disinformation strategy, a counter-disinformation strategy, and it's not just offense, but it's thinking through what are the capabilities we have, we don't have, and proposing recommendations for additional authorities to Congress. You're just going to continue to see kind of chipping around the edges here. So we need a much more strategic approach, I think, to countering disinfo. But back to the ransomware piece, I mean, it's like Thanos. It was inevitable, right? It's that install base that's, that cuts both ways, right, on the inevitable piece, because we know how Endgame finished up. But the point here is that it's such a permissive environment with misconfigurations, vulnerabilities to be exploited. That's all this is, right? It's just eventual monetizing of those vulnerabilities and configurations enabled by cryptocurrencies, where they can transition money out, as well as a safe harbor. So I think the last several months we've seen a change in strategy, which I think is helpful, where we've as Patrick Gray would say, released the hounds. We've gone after them. We've in part doxed them, but you've seen law enforcement action. You've seen reported, I think Nakasoni's even talked about it, degradation attacks, sand and friction against some of the affiliates at least, but also maybe some of the devs themselves. Imposing costs. I mean, that's got to be the answer here, but you're not going to take away all the attack surface just by going after the bad guys. We're going to have to continue to up-level our security capabilities. The third thing I'm worried about is pipelines, and not that pipeline, not Colonial. It's the FBI CISA joint alert from this summer. It was in June. They talked about the Chinese state-sponsored actors targeting 23 different natural gas pipeline operators with successful compromises of 13 and another 7 with unknown compromises. There's one line in that alert from this summer that should scare the hell out of everybody. And it's they were going after the pipelines to hold our infrastructure at risk. And so this goes back to that how people are going to compensate for force projection mismatches and asymmetry. That's a first strike package. And no, I'm not talking about like cyber 9/11s and cyber Pearl Harbors and all that, but this is how you win a war. You never fight the war. You make the adversary change their decision calculus, and you don't put them in a position where they don't want to fight that battle. And this is partly what they're doing here. And it's not just the Chinese, it's the Russians as well, and this is where I think the Iranians and everywhere else is going to go. They're going to put us in a position where the homeland is no longer a sanctuary. This is just like 1957 when you had mutually assured destruction. We're approaching that sort of that capability they have. So when I think about the themes, so if those are the adversary activities that I'm worried about, there are 3 kind of pieces that fall out of that also concern me. The first is just we are operating in a contested environment. I mean, that's it. Our networks are contested environments. Our businesses, our governments, they all operate in a space where we do not have information dominance, and that has to change our decision calculus on how we engage, how we work with partners in government. No single organization, right, is going to be able to defend themselves. The second piece is dilution and distraction. So as I think back to the beginning of 2020, really started that year off with a bang, right? The strike against Soleimani, and that's where I picked up the phone and called Holtquist and said, what do you think happens here? Called a number of other folks in this room. And the idea is that set everybody on edge. And then at the same time, the FSB, Center 16, was doing a whole bunch of different brute force attacks throughout the country on critical infrastructure, state and local governments. Then you had ransomware. And so every single, if any of you do IR, or probably all of you in some way, I mean, it's exhausting. And one of the kind of my fears, and this goes to the dilution piece, is that there was, in the run-up to the 2020 election, is that we were facing kind of a government denial of service. And that our IR teams, by the time October came around, we were going to be worn out. We would have lost kind of the signal-to-noise ratio and didn't really understand what was important. That continues. We continue to see day in, day out activity that keeps and we just don't have enough IR people, and burnout is a real thing. So I continue to worry about that. On the distraction piece, by providing or giving out such a permissive environment for the ransomware actors to come in and create havoc, what we've had to do is shift the focus of our intelligence community and Department of Defense to other things. I don't know what the trade-offs have been, but there's a finite set of resources in the IC. And so when you say, okay, now ransomware is a priority, go figure out what the connections are here, they're not doing something they were doing the day before. And I think that puts us in a much more precarious position that we have to think through. And we're not going to just throw more money at the problem. The tail's too long on this. We've got to continue to implore the private sector to uplift, bootstrap a little bit, to uplift your security. But that's impossible. I mean, I think about Bryson. You keep throwing up the slides about 32 million private sector organizations in the U.S. 16 of them have a security function. Less than 2,000 of them have a red team capability. So where does that leave us from an exposure perspective? And the third theme we have is just kind of rounding it back to that contested environment. It's too permissive of an environment, right? The William Gibson neuromancer, unthinkable complexity. It's incredibly difficult right now to, particularly in large estates, the federal government, for example, 101 civilian agencies in just the federal, the civilian side of the federal government. Incredibly complex, legacy infrastructure, 3-year budget cycles, or 3 years in advance to plan out your budget. I mean, the human brain struggles to think about how complex this is. So what do we do about all this? Again, Stamos inevitable lines. I think regulation's inevitable. I think what's also inevitable is that we'll get it wrong. Again, unthinkable complexities. So I think what we have to do is come into an approach here where we focus on what's important first. We have to really distill down the critical functions that we prioritize, we put first at the top of the list. Now, the challenge here is that what's critical today might not be as critical tomorrow, or there's maybe something more critical. So roll you back again, March 2020, and with COVID. And then all of a sudden, vaccine supply chain was probably one of the most critical national functions in the United States. And we did not have a full understanding or visibility along that supply chain and that value chain. Cold chain ended up being the most critical part for the mRNA vaccines. So we have to have a dynamic assessment, real-time dynamic assessment of what's critical and continue to put the appropriate investments in there. But again, I think we have to change the decision calculus across our private sector partners. And Kieran Martin wrote a great op-ed over the weekend about this in the privatization of cybersecurity. And I'm not advocating at all for the federal government to come in, because I know the people in this room are in a better position than the federal government, most from a security and IR perspective, but we've got to have a more transparent, open conversation. I think the things I usually say here when I'm talking to private sector organizations is like, oh, it starts at the top, it's leadership. You know, everybody's going to be part of the security team, but we know, again, we've got to have a more discrete focus on the things that matter. It's those critical technologies and services that matter. We've got to make it easier to secure, deploy, and manage for the defenders, for the network owners and operators. It's the only way we're going to get out of this. But again, it is going to be the rest of human history that we have a complex digital world that is going to be part of the battle space. And you know, this is the point of Holtquist and his patches of the cyber war veterans. I mean, this is it. This is the team that will make a difference going forward. So I look forward to listening in to the rest of the day. Appreciate everybody coming in and doing what you're doing on a daily basis. And I would continue to, what's that? Oh, sure, yeah. That's always better than a stupid kicker at the end of a speech anyway. All right, yeah.
All right. We've got some time for some Q&A, if anybody like to hear.
Hi, Chris. You mentioned the FSB Center 16 activity from 2020. I know there's been some, I remember the CISA alert from that time period. In your kind of retrospective opinion, was that really about draining resources and creating anxiety, or was it something else?
Yes, I think that's an appropriate answer. I think, you know, I don't know if there's any intelligence, you know, to support that they're actually trying to harry us in some rearguard actions here. But I think it was also just the constant scanning, spray and pray, where they see where they're. I mean, there were a couple cases where they landed in infrastructure adjacent or election infrastructure adjacent stuff, but they didn't know what it was, and it wasn't important infrastructure. But it, you know, that it still is enough to make you ask questions. And you know, when you're paranoid like I am, you see, you know, ghosts behind every corner. It was not a comfortable time. 2020 was for many reasons, was not a comfortable time. The funniest thing about the election security work is it came out of left field with the Iranians. The whole Proud Boys email, and then the Inner Sandman video and all that. And it was just, from a tradecraft perspective, I'm not sure if anybody's talking about that, but it was like impressive, but yet sloppy. And the video was too fast, it was too loud, you couldn't really tell what they were So it was pretty cool, but then you're like, you screwed up. It was too long, too. Yes, yeah. And what pissed me off the most was that I did a tweet the next day that, and you may see this in a memo, I think that's always released tomorrow, but it was, I did a tweet, hashtag sad but true. There are bad guys still out there trying to do bad things. And I was like, come on, somebody pick up on the Metallica hashtag, come on. Yes, where are we? Yeah.
So on that topic of burnout, you mentioned that a lot of the IR folk in government are getting burnt out. Some of the comments I've been hearing from other government folk is the salary isn't matched. It's just easier to get the training in government than leave and not work in government because you'll get better benefits and less stress of the mission of the work that government does. I guess, do you see in the future the government kind of trying to match the benefits and pay of corporate salaries at all? And if not, what do you think the strategy will be to retain talent and not have people work in government, learn the skills, and then leave?
So first off, I don't think it's a bad thing when there's a revolving door from a cyber operational perspective, because it keeps refreshing talent, perspectives, tool sets. I would not, well, all right, so they just announced, at least it says, the cyber talent management system, which is going to, at least the higher end, really put you in a position where you can make, mid 200s, even into the 300s, which is, that's good money. But I wouldn't undersell the mission piece. And there are some private sector companies that have a lot of really interesting telemetry and access. And then there's the US government that has really interesting telemetry and access. And I just lost someone from our consulting group that wanted to go back into government because they just missed that public service mission. And I think there are people that are just drawn to it. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and yes, the stress can be high. I think what government needs to focus on, and Neil Jenkins, I'm sure, has some opinions here, is cutting out the crap, the bureaucracy. It's too hard to work to get into the jobs when it takes a year to go through the security clearance process. And for a lot of this work, frankly, when you think about just the broader information economy exploding, where the smaller piece of it's even classified anyway, why do you need top secret SCI clearances? I mean, there are plenty of people that need to be sitting in, secret at best with, doing open source and collaboration with private sector partners, whether it's TLP or what. So I just think we need to make it easier to come in. I think we need, the UK has some interesting models with their Industry 100 where they can bring folks in. So we just have to be more innovative. And as a lawyer, I'll say this: a lot of lawyers are sometimes the problem. Just need to make it easier.
So over the last year, we've seen 16 law enforcement actions taken against ransomware groups, which is more than in the previous 3 years combined. Do you think this kind of sustained law enforcement action will have a debilitating effect on ransomware eventually if we keep it up?
I think it'll clear out some of the chuckleheads. I mean, look, as I've been thinking about ransomware, like why we are where we are. I mean, we talked about the permissive environment piece, but first off, it's in the strategic objectives of the Kremlin to continue to promote this, whether they're directing fire or not. It doesn't matter. I mean, one is that it develops a strategic cyber reserve, at least within Russia they can draw on down the road. Second, it actually brings money into the country. I mean, things aren't great, right? And so if you can bring money in, and if it's truly billions of dollars, like there was I can't remember who asked this question over the weekend, but it was somewhere on Twitter. is like really looking at the economics of ransomware and that transfer of funds from the Western world into Russia. What is that actually? What's the impact there? Because look, when a dude looks across the street and sees a Lamborghini in the parking lot, like or in the driveway, that's kind of cool. I kind of want that. But then third and finally, like again, it contributes to the broader strategic objectives of the Kremlin to destabilize the West, undermine confidence in the populations of their ability to protect, the national security apparatus to protect critical infrastructure and critical services. So what do I think longer term? I think it'll get kind of the more recent entrants that aren't the skilled ones. It's the ones that are kind of in the as a service space that have provided commodity tools and scripts to run. And I think what that leaves you is the more advanced, capable actors that will evolve their techniques. They'll constantly evolve their techniques. So what does that look like? And we were just talking about it in the hall. Are they going to move away from encrypting networks and just data exfiltration and that's the extortion game? I don't know. Look, I mean, they will monetize it somehow. And until I see Dimitri's here, so until the Kremlin actually does anything about it, we all know his opinion. It's going to be hard to change. And again, I think it's dilutive to the intelligence community and DOD and law enforcement when they're focusing on basically just shitware out there. We've got to change those dynamics or we're going to lose, I think, the edge.